All right, good morning, everybody. It is a minute after 9, time to begin. A few more people may be straggling in, and that's all right. If you would, I'd like to begin with a prayer, please, so if you'd bow with me. Dear Heavenly Father, we come before you this morning thankful of this day, thankful of the opportunity to gather with our brethren, to open up your word and to study from it. We pray, Lord, that you will forgive us of our sins, that you will be with us this morning, that we will purge our worldly thoughts from our minds and focus intently on the subject at hand. We ask, Lord, that you be with us as we study, that we will grow in knowledge and understanding in your word, that you will give us wisdom, that we will have the wherewithal to apply these things to our lives and to be the examples we need to be to those around us. We ask, Lord, that everything we do this morning will be in accordance with your will. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, so book of Ecclesiastes, this is class 2. Began chapter 1 last week. We'll start at the beginning and we'll make our way toward the end. I'll take this slide from Jack Davis. I like it. Leave my contact information up there. You know, I wish you could see that screen because it's much clearer than that one. I'll make the contrast different going forward, but the text is bigger at least. So my phone number is there, my email. If you have any questions, complaints, suggestions, feel free to contact me, Facebook Messenger, whatever. Grab me after service, that's fine too. We are mainly interested in one, seeing what the scriptures teach us, but also making as much application from this book to our own lives as we can, and that's the goal. All right, so last week in Ecclesiastes, began in chapter 1. The word Ecclesiastes is the Greek translation for preacher, or assembler of people, or however the Hebrew does it. In Hebrew, it's koheleth or something like that, and I've seen a couple of spellings for it. But the preacher, and that's how chapter 1 begins. So the preacher, the son of David, king of Jerusalem, he appears to be identifying himself as Solomon. Some scholars disagree with that, and that's okay. We're going to stick with the traditional view, the straightforward reading of Ecclesiastes, that this is indeed from Solomon. It would have been written somewhere around 900 BCE. And he begins this book with a particular perspective or framework. And this is going to be one that we see referenced throughout the book, the phrase, under the sun. It's mentioned nearly 30 times throughout the book, or some variant of it. Under heaven is also referenced there. And this is mainly talking about life on earth. And as we read this book, we're going to see he's presenting it not only as life on earth, it's life primarily focused on life on earth. It's almost not a focus of God, at least starting out. Now, he's building to something. He's building toward God. And as we go through this study, we're going to constantly skip way ahead toward the end to the ultimate conclusion so that we don't lose sight of it, so that we can kind of see this as we're looking at it. So he's starting off that vanity of vanities, all is vanity. Everything's like this vapor. It's hard to grab onto. It's not trustworthy. It's there in a moment, it's gone. You can't fasten anything to it. And that's life. Everything is vanity of vanities. This is a very depressing book starting out, or it appears to be. And again, he's using this as a method to build toward our ultimate conclusion, which is that we should fear God and keep his commandments. And again, we're going to constantly look ahead and remind ourselves of what the conclusion is. And he builds his way going through here. In the next following verses in chapter 1, he talks about kind of these cycles of the earth, but you have to think he's not making a point about earth cycles. He's just saying, man, everything is so mundane. It's a hamster wheel, and we keep riding it. It's just every day is going to be the same. The wind blows this way, it blows that. The rain comes, the sun dries it off. And it's just kind of going through this stuff like, and everything's going to be forgotten. Everything you do is going to be forgotten. I'm going to be forgotten. You're going to be forgotten. And guess what? The people come after us, they're going to be forgotten too when they pass and somebody else comes. He makes a comment in there. That the earth lasts forever. Clearly, that's not what he's talking about. It's just this. Not literally going to last forever. It's outlasting the rest of us. It may as well last forever. It's just things keep going. So he's making the point, it doesn't matter what you or I do. It's just a waste? What's it all for? And as he comes down through the first chapter, there's nothing new under the sun. Everything remains the same. There was a note here I wanted to read before we move on into chapter 2 or the rest of chapter 1. It was a pulpit commentary. But someone here writes in a summary kind of the first 11 verses of chapter 1. It says, the summary of a life's experience. And I just like what he had here. I feel like we're jumping way ahead by looking at this, but I did want to go and take the time to read it. Solomon and Job, says Pascal, had most perfect knowledge of human wretchedness, and have given us the most complete description of it. The one was the most prosperous, and the other was the most unfortunate of men. The one knew by experience the vanity of pleasure, and the other the reality of sorrow. In such diverse ways, God does lead men to the same conclusion, that in human life, apart from Him, that is, apart from God, there is no true satisfaction or lasting happiness, that the immoral spirit cannot find rest in things seen and temporal. And I just liked that, how he even brought in Job. So Solomon is someone who has these immense possessions. He's king of Israel's united kingdom, the last king of their united kingdom, and also at the apex of their golden era. Literally, they had the most wealth, the most gold, the most silver, all these possessions. Solomon had all sorts of stuff, and we're going to be getting to that in this morning, how much he accumulated, how much he achieved. And then this writer is comparing it to Job, who also was, successful in his own ways, but, he suffered immensely. He had everything and lost everything. His sons, his health, all his possessions, lost all of it. He's saying, but those two extremes of having the most and having the least, make a tough existence. But with those, God leads you to the same conclusion that basically, like the conclusion of this book, you need God ultimately for things to make sense, for things to ultimately matter. And that's where we're going. So in Ecclesiastes verse 13, this is where we left off last week, Solomon goes on and says, I gave my heart to seek and search out wisdom concerning all things that are done under heaven. This sore travail hath God given the sons of man to be exercised therewith. This book always appealed to me as a youth, in part because of the hopeless kind of nature of it. It was just enjoyable for me to read. Hopelessness, I guess. But I like how he says this sore travail, and it's interesting that he says that God has given this to the sons of man. Basically, this sore travail of searching and seeking out by wisdom concerning all things under the sun. So things of this life, God has given to us to search and seek out. There are several different ways we can probably take this, and several different things we can take from it. And first of all, and I think like we pointed out last week, he mentions God here. And this is interesting. So to me, in this book, so he is talking about, throughout the whole book, a life without God in it. A life that God is not in the perspective. Yet this is not an atheist talking. He mentions God. And that is a lesson I think we need to take too, one application, that even if we are faithful, even if we are people who believe in God, we can easily forget Him and be overwhelmed by the other things and going on in our lives, our jobs, our family, and everything else we want or don't have or need to get or have to do. All these things, if we let God fall behind us, we can kind of veer off path, if that makes sense. So I do think that is an important point to note. But also, and we're going to keep going and see this, we need to work. This referenced in Genesis, even before the fall, right? Adam and Eve were to tend the garden. And then, of course, after the fall, labor was going to become even more difficult, right? Sweat of your brow and dealing with thorns and thistles and all this and that. Having to work through things. Work is going to be part of it. It's going to feel like a sore travail sometimes. That's fine. But also something to this too. It's almost like, and he gets to it as we go, this idea of like striving for the wind is something you can't ever quite capture and catch, but you have to keep going. And that's an interesting thought, at least to me, right? If you're striving for the wind, you can't ever quite get it. I feel like these themes here are not necessarily, they could be, and some of them definitely are. I don't know that they're necessarily all, or that they would all have to be personal experiences of Solomon to write this. I think a lot of them are, obviously, but some of it just could be a method for leading to the story. So almost imagining like how rough some things can be, or maybe feelings that are common to man. So like that feeling that something's missing, that feeling that I need more, or I need to achieve more, something more. Does that make sense? Has anybody else felt that? Is it just me? Like, oh man, I got to do something. If it's just me, I'm sorry. I feel that way sometimes, or I have. And I think Solomon has as well, and I think he's trying to speak to other people who have too. So let's go on to 14. That's really where we should begin this time. That was us catching up. So let me just read verses 14 through 18, and we'll kind of come back and talk about them a moment. Actually, okay. 14 through 18. I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity and vexation of spirit. That which is crooked cannot be made straight, and that which is wanting cannot be numbered. I communed with my own heart, saying, Lo, I am come to great estate, and have gotten more wisdom than all they that have come before me in Jerusalem. And this verse 16 actually is one of the textual things that some of the scholars cite who say, well, this couldn't have been written by Solomon, because by all the people who've ruled before him in Jerusalem, who ruled before Solomon in Jerusalem?
One man,
David, right? Because David started his reign 7 years ruling in Hebron, and then before him was Solomon. David conquered Jerusalem and then set up his capital there. So Solomon comes out. So they're saying like all before him, you had one guy, like all. So that's a textual thing. Again, we're gonna. It could still be Solomon. I think it still is. Whatever. Anyways, I'm just going to offer that to you. So anyways, we'll keep reading. I'll start over verse 16. I commune with my own heart, saying, Lo, I am come to great estate, and I have gotten more wisdom than all they that have been before me in Jerusalem. Yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge, and I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this is also vanity and vexation of spirit. For in much wisdom is much grief, and he that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. I'm reading from the King James, obviously. Just my preference. I think there are better translations out there. I like kind of the poetic nature of the King James. I know some versions, instead of vexation of spirit, are going to say grasping for the wind. Right? Does all of yours say that? Grasping for the wind, or some variant of it? I think that's probably a more accurate translation. Again, I'm not a Greek scholar or Hebrew scholar, but looking back at the Hebrew interlinear Bible, that seems to be the idea. And it makes sense, too, especially back here in verse 14. So I have seen all the works that are done under the sun, and behold, all is vanity. And remember, the Hebrew word for vanity there is vapor. And then striving for the wind. Those two seem to fit together right there. And I think they're trying to put together this idea of, man, it's just things are futile. It's a futile effort. You're trying to catch the wind. You're never really going to grab it, right? It's always going to fall through your fingers, And if we remember the previous verse, what we looked at, we have to seek and search out with wisdom the things concerning everything under the sun. And then Solomon here, the very next verse, in verse 14, is like, I've seen all the works that are done under the sun. And man, it's futile. It's a waste. It's emptiness. It's nothing tangible for us to grab onto. Solomon's not a fun guy. Yeah. And in verse 15, that which is crooked cannot be made straight, and that which is wanting cannot be numbered. Again, I think the theme here is, and man, if you look up commentaries for these verses, man, they write, in length about everything, and like, wow, where is that stuff coming from? But I think if we look at the context of the passage, it's more of that kind of same, like, you work, you do all this stuff, you try everything, but you know what? If something's crooked, I can't make it straight. I can't change that. I'm not really going to make an impact here. And then the things that are wanting, the things that are needed, they're always going to be there. And sometimes I like taking a moment to take little tangents or maybe chase little rabbits. I think they're important, or the things that I've thought about. I mean, you get frustrated at work sometimes, or in doing stuff. But I've even heard people, and this will come up later in the book as well. But there are sometimes, people say stuff like, well, you always got the poor, so basically. And sometimes they say it almost seems like they're saying, well, there's no point in helping them, whatever, they're always going to be there. And that's not the approach to take. Think about, and I want to say I probably made this point last week too. If I did, I'm sorry. I'm going to bring it up a lot as well because it's simple, but I like it. You dirty dishes. I hate doing dirty dishes. And no matter how often I do them, there are always more dirty dishes. Like they don't stop. It's like death and taxes and dirty dishes. You can't get away from it. But it's true, and it's one of those things you can't sit and fret about. It's like this. You're childish if you are. You're kind of sorry. You can't cry about dirty dishes. You just got to do them. And there are a lot of things like that in life you have to do. And again, Solomon. I want to remind everybody, Solomon is building toward something better at the end, but this is the outlook he has coming up. Man, everything is just always bad. Like, things are falling apart. What is it? What's wrong here? And so in verse 16, he comes down, well, I commune with my own heart. Okay, so I'm thinking things through. Now, this phrase, commune with my own heart, we're going to address this here a few verses down in a little more depth. I want to add here, though, that some very well-educated people say they don't necessarily think that he's necessarily saying it like a bad or kind of flighty thing. He thinks that was probably a Hebrew phrase that meant I'm investing as much wisdom as I can into something, and that may be true. We're going to take a look at a different angle on that here in a couple of verses, but I'll give that. So anyways, as a result of all this stuff that's not working, and we're going to see this as we go through Ecclesiastes 2, that he brings up all this depressing stuff, and it's like, but I'm going to try this. I'm going to try something else, and let's see if this works. And then you'll see that doesn't work out either. Okay, well, that's a duh. And then everything's terrible again, and then I'm going to maybe this, so we'll give this a shot. I'm like, that's going to fail too. And so we're coming up on one of these right here in verse 16. So I communed in my own heart, saying, lo, I'm come to great estate. I've gotten more wisdom than all they that have come before me in Jerusalem. Yea, my heart had great experience of wisdom and knowledge. Solomon can say this. God gave him wisdom. We looked at that last week. And again, ignore like, wow, he's pretentious or arrogant or whatever. Let's ignore that. This is a story we're building to something. Things look pretty bad, but you know what? I'm a smart guy. I've been given wisdom. I know stuff. I've been successful here in ruling my kingdom. And so I'm going to do this. And so verse 17, and I gave my heart to know wisdom and to know madness and folly. I perceive that this is also vanity and vexation of spirit, or striving for the wind. It's also vanity and striving for the wind. Isn't that odd to anybody else, right? Like you're striving for wisdom, but then along with that, you also want to know madness and folly. Does anybody else's verse 17 read different than madness and folly? Does it say something else? Everybody say that? Nobody want to speak up? It all says that? Okay. Joe says yes, so. Yeah, madness and folly. Isn't that odd? An odd pairing. Wisdom, madness, and folly. They sound contrary to one another. Is that right? I mean, it looks like a person who feels lost. Something is missing. I don't know what it is, but something is off here. Like I'm gonna try this. The wisdom's good, but you know what? Maybe this other stuff is good too. And I want to say we have probably all done that to some degree before, right? And that's anything you chase that's maybe not godly, not wholesome, whatever. In a way, it's I don't want to get too far ahead. Yeah, I'll hit Esau in a moment, but I do think of Esau when I get here. Yes.
I think the phrase that we would use today would be ignorance is bliss. Right? The more you know, if you're ignorant of the depravity of our world, then
Right.
the will of God. So the more you know, the more your eyes are opened to, we're in serious trouble. And so I think that when he's talking about opening my mind to knowledge and to falling into madness, it's really the more you know, the more you realize that, what is so wrong.
Well, yeah, I mean, you're encapsulating verse 18, his kind of conclusion there, and I view this as a transition kind of verse, because what comes next is a direct result of this idea. So I definitely agree with you. I do think, because we're going to see some of this too here in the next few verses as well. Like I think in some of it, he literally gives himself over to like madness and folly. Some, he chases. And we'll get to that. Pleasure and wine and these other kind of things. It's almost like I'm trying every little thing. But you'll see people do that today, just as you're saying, but also to this other thing. And there are degrees to it. So like drugs, alcoholism. Porn, food, any of these things you can talk about, there's instant, empty gratification kind of things that people, either fall into a little or a lot. And it's, those might give moments of a perceived like kind of gratification. And if they didn't, people wouldn't chase them, right? But there are other degrees to that as well. So if you don't fall that far into like madness and folly, I mean, you can chase. I don't know. You can chase, achievement or work or experiences, and some of those things aren't bad in and of themselves, obviously, but they can be if taken to an excess, and it can be if that is like your sole focus, because you've got nothing stored up for the hereafter, right? I want to look at Matthew 5 real fast and talk about, a passage that just keeps on giving every time you look into it. Jesus' Sermon on the Mount is just one of them. There's so many good things in here that are just rich. And they're also like Mary Poppins' carpet bag. As often as you dig into them, there's going to be stuff you can pull out. It's a never-ending bag of goodness. Verses 29 and 30, and I like this passage. I've come to like it more since Asher, my youngest, asked me about it a couple of years ago. So verse 29 of Matthew 5, and if thy right eye offend thee, pluck it out, cast it far from thee, for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. And if thy right hand offend thee, cut it off, cast it from thee, for it is profitable for it is profitable for thee that one of thy members should perish, and not that thy whole body should be cast into hell. I like that, and I like telling the story of Asher, how he's asking me about it, and it was like, this literal interpretation, like, wow, is that I've got to cut my eye out? What is that? And for some reason, his questioning of that made the passage, I don't know, stick out to me even more, because some of these things are like that. Clearly, you're not going to cut off your body parts. You shouldn't. That's crazy. Don't do that. But the point is, like, these things that get in your way, get in between you and God, you got to cast off, and sometimes it's not easy. It could be a family member. Matthew 10 talks about that. Jesus, saying in Matthew 10, you think I've come to bring peace? I didn't come to bring peace. I'm bringing a sword. And it's going to set father against brother, mother against daughter, and things like that. It's going to cost you something, and it could be a job. It could be, your smartphone. It could be a number of things that get in your way, and those are things we have to take time to examine within ourselves. I think really to make sure we let any of these things drag us out or distract us so much that we forget God. Because that's really it. God should be first, and those things that we're missing, those things that we're searching for, I feel like that hole, if we feel one inside of us, is probably shaped like God. And I think Solomon was going to end up showing that as well as we get moving But in verse 18, just like Joe was saying, you have this perspective, the more you know, sometimes the more depressing things can be. How depraved we are. How things are going to just go and transpire. Man, I can keep doing stuff and it's just going to end badly. Things aren't going to go well. Or the conclusion, like we're going to get to in chapter 2. I know I keep jumping ahead some, but he's going to get to the point, finally, we're all just ultimately going to die. And then what? And this is, again, a view from a certain perspective within a certain framework, right? And this is predominantly one focused solely on the physical, natural world. And that's about it. This is a writer who believes in a God, who mentions him a few times, but he's not really focused on him. It's almost an after, it's there, but I'm dealing with all this here. And man, it's rough. It can be rough. I want to take another tangent while we're here, because the more you know doesn't have to be sorrowful. Wisdom doesn't have to be grief, right? It doesn't. Proverbs 1:7, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction. The first part of that verse is really want to focus on, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. And there can be some maybe sorrowful conclusions you can draw from some of that knowledge. Some people are going to end up in hell. Some people are not going to be saved. That's true. That's sorrowful. But there's another end to that as well, that God has come and done all he can to redeem mankind, to provide a way out, to provide a hope of something after this life, the next. That's not all a waste of it. So I want to chase this tangent just for a moment. There is a difference between happiness and contentment and fulfillment. Now somebody may say, "No, wait a minute, Josh. Fulfillment and contentment are just types of happiness," and that's fair enough. But not all happiness is fulfillment and contentment. And that's a big distinction. So, and I want to say we probably made the point in here before too. I just want to be happy. And a lot of people will say that. And have probably always said that. I just want to be happy. I deserve to be happy. I deserve to be happy. I need to chase this happiness. And man, talk about, striving for the wind, something you can't fully grasp, because it all, in chasing some things, you have to leave others. And that's true. If I want to be, fit and healthy, legitimately fit and healthy, I may also legitimately want some cake sometimes. And you cannot have both, at least at the same moment, right? Joe Wilson knows all about that. So, dude he's never enjoyed a birthday. I don't know. But
how come I got the biggest laugh?
because we all know it's true. I'm sorry, I just lost that. You're my hero. I don't know.
Too, it made me think of the rich young ruler.
Yeah.
And he said, "Well, I've done all these things, but what do I lack?" He knew he lacked something, and his joy was in his possessions. And so, he said, "Well, go sell everything you have and come follow me." Well, obviously, God doesn't want us to sell everything, and we can't all be ministers. But he was able to look into his heart and knew what had his.
Yeah, no, the rich young ruler. That's yeah, exactly. That's a really good example. I've known, and a lot of you probably have too. And there's probably 1,000 anecdotes we can give, but I've known some people who have, their choice. I want to divorce my wife, or divorce my husband and move on, and I'll be happier over here because I deserve to be happy. Well, the result has been it has changed the relationship with their children, not for the better. It's made it worse. And it's well, okay, well, I was chasing happiness and I got that happiness I was looking for, but now I'm less happy on this end of the spectrum, right? You can have these competing wants and all like that, and that's kind of what I want to get to Esau. We all remember him from Genesis 25, right? Isaac's, no, somebody help me, man. I just drew a total blank here. Esau and Jacob. Thank you. Sorry. I'm getting older fast. Esau, Jacob's brother, came out first. They were twins, but he came out first, so technically he was the firstborn, right? And then he is kind of deceived by his brother, in several ways. I guess this instance I'm talking about, because Hebrews chapter 12, 14 through 17 says that Esau is profane because he gave up his birthright over some stew, some red pottage. And if we remember back in Genesis 25, he was out hunting for his father to get some venison for his dying father. That's one thing he asked for, so Esau's out there doing it. And it's not like us today, sitting in a deer stand or whatever. I mean, the man's out there in the wilderness going to town with his, not a compound bow, traditional bow out there hunting, doing what he can to get his dying father, his last dying wish. He comes back, he's tired, and oftentimes, I think sometimes we're saying, well, he really wasn't that tired. I bet he was probably pretty tired. I bet he was probably pretty hungry. I get hungry every 2 or 3 hours, and I'm telling you, sometimes it's hungry enough I could eat a baby. All right, I get pretty hungry. But I think that Esau was exceedingly hungry. He had exerted himself and probably been without for quite a while. He didn't have, Piggly Wiggly down the street and you go get something. He didn't have fast food places, right? He was hungry. And so his brother's cooking something. His brother's like, well, I'll sell you a bowl of my soup just for your birthright. And so I always felt like, man, that was so unfair to Esau. So unfair. Jacob really did his brother wrong there. But you get to Hebrews, and the Hebrew writer says that Esau was profane for taking that deal. I'm like, man, that was so tough. Dude was hungry. He was tired. He needed that. He needed something to eat, man. But the older I've gotten, the more I've thought about that, the more this resonates, because anything you do to sacrifice, so if you imagine the birthright is some huge thing that was going to be bestowed upon him much later in time, he was willing to trade that for some little bowl of soup. If we indulge in any sin, small or not, we are potentially sacrificing our chances of salvation in heaven. What a profane exchange. It is not at all worth it. And so at those times where things are hard, like, I really feel like I need that, or really pull to this, or temptation's really bent down on you, that's like Esau starving for some soup. And like, how foolish was he for doing it? And then how much more foolish are we when we do it? That's an important point. And I want to turn here to James 5 too. Look at this and actually put our eyes on these points here. Does anyone have a point? I'm rambling a lot. If anyone has anything, just speak up. But James 5. Verse 11, behold, we count them happy which endure. Ye have heard of the patience of Job and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercies. So you have to endure. Well, and let me back up here to verse 10. I guess it makes more sense if I read this. So take, my brethren, the prophets who have spoken in the name of the Lord for an example of suffering, affliction, and of patience. Now verse 11, behold, we count them happy which endure. You have heard of the patience of Job and have seen the end of the Lord, that the Lord is very pitiful and of tender mercy. And while we're on this thought, let's just turn over to 1 Peter 4, verse 14 now. Let's begin in verse 12. Beloved, think it not strange concerning the fiery trial which is to try you, as though some strange thing happened unto you. But rejoice, inasmuch as ye are partakers of Christ's sufferings, that when his glory shall be revealed, ye may be glad, and also with exceeding joy. If ye be reproached for the name of Christ, happy are ye, for the Spirit of glory and God resteth upon you. On their part he is evil spoken of, but on your part he is glorified. So we're just talking about brethren here who are suffering, or prophets who have suffered actual affliction, actual persecution, but they're happy. This is a different type of happiness, different type of happiness than me going to a movie or whatever, going down a slide. Those are different types of happiness. One is this fulfillment, something that I have done well. I have been tried and tested, And I came out right. I came out the other side better for it. I knew I stood strong. And that's this fulfillment and contentment. That's a different type of happiness, right, than going to a birthday party, yeah? And so I think they illustrate here some of the differences in happiness in these pursuits that we're looking at. And I wanted to take a moment for this tangent because that is an important distinction I think we have to be mindful of. And at times we'll forget it, when we're hungry enough and want that bowl of stew, when things are real tough, it's easy to forget it. It reminds me of Proverbs, I think it's 24:10. If thou faint in the day of adversity, thy strength is small. I like that passage too, because it's the day of adversity we usually understand, like, okay, that's the toughest day, right? The day of adversity, that's the hardest day. So if you fail on that day, well, I get it. If you're going to fail, it's going to be on that day. But I like that passage because if you fail on that day, your strength is small. That's the whole reason to have strength, right? You don't need strength to lift something easy. You need it to lift something heavy. And so the day of adversity is the whole reason to have strength. And so we especially have to remember when things are hard. Yeah. All right, so enough of that tangent. Let's see here. So chapter 2. So remember 18, I was saying, was a transition passage. Much wisdom is much grief. He that increaseth knowledge increaseth sorrow. And so verse 1, let me read 1 through 3 here of chapter 2, back in Ecclesiastes. I said in my heart, go to now, I will prove thee with mirth. Therefore enjoy pleasure. And behold, this also is vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of mirth, what doeth it? I sought in mine heart to give myself unto wine, yet acquaint mine heart with wisdom, and to lay hold of folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men, which they should do under the heaven all the day of their life. So he's like, man, if wisdom, wisdom is grief and knowledge is sorrow, I'll tell you what, man, I'm gonna try and chase this pleasure kind of thing for a bit. I'd rather be happy than sad, of course. So let's see if this works here. And some of these things obviously are like these momentary pursuits, these instances of gratification that don't ever really quench what you're looking for, like Esau, I'm sure. As soon as he had that first bite of his soup, it was probably, his eyes probably opened up and like, what did I just do? That was not worth it. That was a nice bowl of soup, but man, it wasn't that good, And that's probably how that went, at least as I imagine it. And usually if we chase things like this, it does too. And he has some interesting combinations here also. So like wine, and yet acquaint my heart with wisdom. This is interesting because Solomon, this isn't the only time he writes about these two together. So let's remember, he also wrote Proverbs. If you go to Proverbs, it may just be one page in your Bible. It is in mine. Proverbs 31. Verses 4 and 5, Proverbs 31. It is not for kings, O Lemuel. It is not for kings to drink wine, nor for princes strong drink, lest they drink and forget the law and pervert the judgment of any of the afflicted. He's trying it here, but at some point he recognizes that these two aren't really compatible. So again, he's someone that's lost, searching for something, somewhere, everywhere, and at every turn so far, it's just coming up empty. Laughter, madness, what's the point in it? And then he saw it in his heart. Again, this is where I want to look into this a little bit more. I saw it in my heart to give myself unto wine, yet acquaint my heart with wisdom. Lay hold on folly till I might see. So I do want to focus on this, giving myself, communing with my heart, looking into my heart, that kind of thing. Proverbs 28:26. I want to look at that. Solomon writes here in Proverbs 28, verse 26, he that trusteth in his own heart is a fool, but whoso walketh wisely, he shall be delivered. And this is kind of a prevailing theme of our day. It may not be worded quite this way, but that the idea of it is certainly there. You only live once. You got to be happy. YOLO. I don't know if the kids still say that. You only live once, right? So chase and do what you want. But it's foolish to rely solely on your heart. I'm not saying you can't ever take it into account, but if that's the only thing you're chasing, this is almost like chasing whims. It's not. It's kind of foolish. Children kind of do that, and that's one reason children have parents, so they learn not to do that all the time. You can't just chase everything that you want when you think you want it. It's not always good. You have to be wise. You have to pursue good, wholesome things. Pursue the Lord. And that's another thing too. He mentions good here in verse 3. I want to acquaint my heart with wisdom, to lay hold on folly, till I might see that which was good for the sons of men, which they should do under the sun. This idea of good has been in my head for a lot lately. I know some people who are atheists. Again, Solomon's not approaching this from an atheistic kind of thing, but it's one where God is not at the forefront. But this idea of good, I think, is something we all understand to a degree. And some people will minimize this. This is interesting. They'll say, well, certain animals are altruistic too, therefore we can see, goodness is a natural kind of thing, blah, 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 blah. And it's an interesting point. So bear with me here. I might ramble a little bit, but did you know that crows can count? Anybody heard that? That certain birds can count? Not very high, but they know the difference between a single one and multiple. So if you take one person in the woods hunting a crow, and that one person leaves, the crow knows, okay, it was gone, so they count to one. You get two people go into the woods, and one leaves. The crow still knows somebody else is in there. I'm not coming out yet. I'm going to be hunted. You get 3 or 4 in there, and it might lose count. So if you get 3 or 4 in there and one leaves, you get 3 or 4 in there and 2 or 3 leave and one's left, it's like, okay, well, the people are gone. I can come out now, and that one remaining will come out there. So they can count. There have been that's an anecdote from my grandfather, by the way, but there's also actual studies on some of this too. They understand numbers to some degree. But math is still a universal law. Is that right? Does that mean, well, animals know math just as well as we do, therefore it's some temporal kind of thing on Earth? Well, no, we didn't. It's a concept, but we didn't invent it with our minds. We perceive it with our minds, right? And so crows understand maybe 1 + 2, maybe even 1 + 3, perhaps, but they can't understand physics. They can't understand calculus, and it takes training for people to understand that higher level of stuff. And I think, and I'm trying to make this comparison with like goodness. So we understand good on some level, right? Like, don't murder somebody, that's not good. We get that. Maybe don't steal from a poor person, that's not good. And we help someone who's in need, that's good. We understand these at basic level kind of things. And so when someone says, well, animals are altruistic, they'll help another animal who's in need. Okay, well, that's base level. That's like crows counting to 2. But this higher level of goodness, what we get from the scriptures, what we get from really investing ourselves in it, that's a higher level of stuff that takes some training, takes some investment. Animals don't know goodness the way we do. And these concepts, like math, aren't something we invent conceptually. We perceive conceptually, if that makes sense. Does that make sense to anybody? I hope so. I feel like it makes sense. And these laws, like physics and stuff like that, I think exist whether we recognize them or not. So does goodness. And so if we can understand goodness in that kind of idea, I don't think it's difficult to see God is not far from that. God is good after all. God is some higher concept, and goodness and things like that are attributes of God, not separate from him, if that makes sense. All right, man, that was yeah, Trevor, go ahead.
Just as you brought up altruism in the animals, and so we can have confidence in the fact that the goodness, our ability to recognize goodness versus evil as humans, and that separates us from the rest of the world. All altruistic organisms, or instances of altruism beyond humans, is ultimately selfishly driven. You've got altruistic individuals that might be in a colony, but they probably can't reproduce, so they're going to serve the mental colony because that's the only way that they're going to succeed and so forth. And a lot of things that look like altruistic, like a leopard one time was seeing care of it. That's what got published. What didn't get published is the fact the leopard was taking it back to its own cubs to practice on. So like there's even what we perceive to be altruistic from a secular point of view is not really altruistic.
No, I agree. That's a good point. I mean, goodness is worth pursuing, and absolutely, these higher things are for people, and only, yeah. I appreciate your point, Trevor. That was a good one. Sorry, the people online couldn't hear it. And that's all we got this morning. Appreciate it, and we'll pick up there next week.